I know this because my trail camera on the East Ridge logged the sequence at 6:47 Tuesday morning. Marcus Aldridge, in full hunting camouflage, a compound bow in his left hand, moving through the aspen draw that ran along the interior of my east fence line, approximately 340 yards inside my property boundary. And then at 6:49, the bull. Titan was 4 years old, registered Angus, 1,380 pounds of championship genetics that I had paid $62,000 for at the Western Slope bull sale 2 springs ago. He was not aggressive by temperament. I had worked with him extensively and knew his behavior well. But he was territorial in the specific way of mature bulls who have established a range, and the aspen draw on the East Ridge was his preferred morning route, and Marcus Aldridge was standing in the middle of it with a compound bow. The camera logged what followed across 14 frames over approximately 90 seconds. Marcus ran. Titan did not pursue past the draw boundary. Bulls generally won't. They establish their range and they hold it, but those 90 seconds were sufficient to produce the kind of departure that leaves gear behind. I found a backpack at 6:53 when I arrived at the draw on my ATV. Inside it, a rangefinder, 2 broadhead arrows in a quiver, a doe estrus scent bottle, a half-eaten granola bar, and a Garmin GPS unit that, when I turned it on, showed a saved waypoint labeled Elk Spot, located approximately 600 yards deeper into my property than where Marcus had been standing when Titan found him. He had been planning to go further in. I photographed everything before I touched it. The backpack, the contents, the GPS screen, the trail camera footage exported to my phone, and the boot tracks in the soft ground of the draw that led clearly from the east fence line, where a section of wire had been pulled away from a post, not cut, pulled, the kind of gap a person makes when they don't want evidence of tools, to the spot where the backpack had been dropped. Then I called my wife, Renata. Then I called our attorney, Leonard. Then I called the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Office, because trespassing to hunt is not the same as trespassing to walk, and the distinction carries specific legal weight that I had understood since the morning I bought this ranch and learned what it meant to own land in a state that takes wildlife law seriously. What happened in the 8 weeks after that Tuesday morning, what Marcus faced, what Karen said when she understood the full scope of it, what the documentation produced in a legal process that Marcus's attorney described as the most thoroughly prepared trespass case he had encountered in 21 years of practice. None of that was about the bull. Titan was just the instrument of an immediate consequence. The lasting consequences came from the documentation. They always do. My name is Solomon Reeves, 57 years old, 30 years as a licensed civil engineer specializing in water infrastructure and land systems in western Colorado, the last 13 running my own firm. I understand land, how it is configured, how it is documented, how its boundaries are established and maintained, and what the law says when someone treats your land as though the boundaries do not apply to them. My wife Renata is a licensed land surveyor. She has spent 25 years measuring and documenting property boundaries with the precision that her profession requires. She understands, better than almost anyone I know, that a property line is not an abstraction. It is a physical location on the earth, documented in the county record, legally defined, and enforceable. We had owned the Reeves Ranch for 9 years. 684 acres in Garfield County, Colorado, mixed terrain of meadow, aspen, pinyon juniper, and high country conifer, with 2 seasonal drainages, a small private pond, and elk habitat that the Colorado Parks and Wildlife biologist who had assessed it called exceptional. We ran a small Angus operation, 42 cows, 2 bulls including Titan, and a replacement heifer program that Renata managed with the methodical attention she applied to everything. The ranch was bounded on all 4 sides by clearly marked fence. I had walked every fence line personally in the first year of ownership and had done so annually since. Every corner post was surveyed and monumented. Every fence line post was marked with posted signs, orange, compliant with Colorado statute, spaced at intervals below the legal maximum, impossible to miss if you were paying attention and reading what was in front of you. The signs said, posted, no trespassing, no hunting, private property, VIOLATORS will be PROSECUTD. Marcus Aldridge had not been paying attention or had decided the signs did not apply to him. Marcus was 49 years old, a commercial real estate developer from Denver, and Karen's husband. They owned a cabin property approximately 2 miles from our ranch boundary, a 40-acre recreational parcel they had purchased 4 years earlier for elk hunting access. Their 40 acres had limited elk presence because it was lower elevation and primarily pinyon juniper without the aspen draw habitat that elk preferred in this part of Garfield County. Our property had exceptional elk habitat. The biologist who assessed it had said so. The trail cameras I maintained across the ranch documented significant elk activity, multiple mature bulls, including a 6x6 that I had been photographing for 2 seasons, and that had become, in my own informal classification, the bull I hoped would use our property for the rest of his natural life, undisturbed. I am not opposed to hunting. I am opposed to people hunting on my property without my permission. The first indication of the problem came 8 months before the Titan incident. My trail cameras on the east fence line, I maintained 6 cameras covering the approaches to the property boundary, logged a figure in hunting camouflage on the exterior of my fence at the east boundary. The figure appeared to be examining my fence line, specifically the section in the aspen draw where the terrain made the fence less visible from a distance. I noted this in my documentation log. Not with alarm, hunters scout public and private land in the fall, and the exterior of my fence line was accessible from the adjacent BLM parcel that ran along my east boundary. Scouting from the exterior was not a violation. But I noted it because 30 years of civil engineering had given me the habit of knotting what was worth knotting. 3 weeks later, 2 cameras logged figures on the interior of my east fence, 2 people in hunting camouflage at early morning light. They were in the aspen draw. They did not appear aware of the cameras. I drove to the draw that morning. Found no one, they had departed before I arrived. But I found boot tracks on both sides of the fence at a specific location where the wire showed signs of having been pushed outward and then returned to approximate position. I photographed everything. Then I called CPW and filed an informal report, which they noted, but which did not rise to the level of a formal investigation without specific identification of the trespassers. I installed 2 additional cameras on the east fence approaches and 1 on the interior of the draw. Over the following 6 months, the cameras documented 7 more incidents, figures at or near the east fence line, 3 of which included clear images of the same individual in the same camouflage pattern with the same compound bow. On the 4th camera, image clear enough to show the individual's face, I recognized Marcus Aldridge. I recognized him because Karen and Marcus had been to our Denver primary residence twice for neighborhood events. We lived 3 streets apart in the same HOA in Denver, and because the human brain is reasonably good at recognizing faces, it has seen before in social contexts, even when those faces are partially obscured by hunting camouflage and captured on a trail camera at 6:43 in the morning. I called Renata, I showed her the image. She looked at it for a long time. She said, "That's Marcus Aldridge." "Yes," I said. "He's on our property." "Yes, he's bow hunting on our property." "That's what the bow suggests," I said. She set down the photograph. She has a specific expression she uses when a measurement has confirmed a suspicion she had not wanted to have, the expression of a surveyor looking at a boundary that has been violated. "What are we doing?" "Building the complete record," I said, "before we take any action." "How complete does it need to be?" "Complete enough that when CPW and the DA's office review it, the case is self-evidently valid. No gaps, no ambiguities, no room for him to claim he didn't know where the boundary was or that it was an accident." She looked at the camera image again. He's 300 yards inside our fence. In the fourth image, I said, the second image has him closer to the boundary, but the fourth image, with the rangefinder visible on his belt, that's a person who knows exactly how far he is from his target and is making deliberate decisions about position. And we have 7 incidents documented. 7 before this one, I said. The documentation goes back 8 months. She nodded slowly. How do you want to play Tuesday? I had been thinking about Tuesday, the morning the long-range weather forecast indicated would be the best elk hunting conditions of the remaining season. Clear, cold, with a slight east wind that would carry human scent away from the primary elk movement corridor on our west ridge and make the aspen draw on the east ridge the optimal position for a bow hunter waiting for elk moving between feeding and bedding areas. Let the cameras run, I said. Let him come in, document the full incursion, then respond to what the cameras show. And Titan has his own ideas about his morning route, I said. I'm not going to adjust his schedule. She almost smiled. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression that precedes a smile when the situation is too serious for one. Make sure the cameras have fresh batteries, she said. They had fresh batteries. At 6:47 Tuesday, Marcus was in the aspen draw with his compound bow and his rangefinder and his doe estrus scent and his GPS unit with the waypoint labeled elk spot 600 yards deeper into my property. At 6:49, Titan arrived. At 6:53, I arrived. I collected the backpack and its contents. I photographed the fence gap where Marcus had entered, the wire pulled away from the post, the boot tracks on both sides, the grass compressed by a body moving through. I documented the distance from the fence gap to where the backpack had been dropped, 280 yards, confirmed by my own GPS unit. I documented the elk tracks in the draw that showed where the herd had moved through at early light before Marcus arrived and where they had scattered when the bull moved. Then I drove to the fence gap and confirmed the location on my surveyed boundary map. Marcus had entered my property at a point where my posted signs were visible from both sides of the fence. There were 2 signs within 40 feet of the entry point, one on the post immediately east of the gap and one on the post immediately west. Both were intact, properly mounted, and clearly legible. He had read them and entered anyway, or he had not read them, which was its own category of problem for someone holding a bow in hunting camouflage at 6:47 in the morning. I called CPW at 8:15. Wildlife Officer Teresa Nakamura, who managed this district, had been my contact for 2 years because I reported elk counts seasonally and participated in the state's voluntary landowner wildlife management program. She knew the ranch. She knew its elk population. I described the situation and told her I had camera documentation going back 8 months, covering 7 previous incidents plus that morning's. She was quiet for a moment. She said 7 prior incidents plus this morning. 7 documented camera instances of figures on the interior of my east boundary. This morning is the first with complete identification and evidence of active hunting activity. You have the backpack with the GPS unit showing a waypoint inside my property. Another pause. Solomon, that GPS is evidence. I know, I said. I haven't touched it since I photographed it. I'm coming out this afternoon, she said. Don't move anything. She arrived at 2:15. She was thorough and experienced and had the specific quality of a wildlife officer who takes trespass hunting seriously because wildlife trespass hunting undermines the entire framework of Colorado's wildlife management system. She documented the fence gap. She documented the boot tracks. She documented the backpack contents. She reviewed my trail camera footage on my laptop, all 8 months of it, organized by date and camera position, with GPS coordinates for each camera location cross-referenced to my survey map. She looked at me when she finished. She said, "You've been documenting this since October of last year." Since the first camera image of a figure at the east boundary, I said. And you identified Mr. Aldridge from a camera image in February. Yes. And you didn't contact him directly. No, I wanted the complete record before any contact was made. She nodded. She understood this approach. 20 years of wildlife enforcement had given her an appreciation for complete records. The charge is hunting on private land without permission under Colorado Revised Statute 336116, combined with the trespass charge. The GPS evidence of intended further incursion and your documented prior incidents, the DA's office is going to have significant charging latitude. She paused. I'm also going to flag the fence gap. Intentional fence manipulation to gain access is a separate violation. He pulled the wire away from the post, I said. He didn't cut it. Intentional manipulation, regardless of method, she said. The statute doesn't require cutting. She took the backpack as evidence. She left me with a case number and her direct contact information and said she would be in touch within 48 hours. Leonard filed the civil trespass claim that afternoon. We had discussed it the previous month when the February camera image had confirmed identification. He had prepared the filing and was waiting for the triggering incident that established active hunting activity and provided the evidentiary foundation for maximum damages. Tuesday was that incident. The criminal referral from CPW went to the Garfield County DA's office Wednesday. I know this because Teresa Nakamura called me Wednesday afternoon to confirm it and to tell me the DA had reviewed the documentation package and had described it as unusually complete. Marcus called me Thursday morning. He had apparently been contacted by CPW Wednesday and had understood the scope of what was happening. His voice, when I answered, had the specific quality of a person who has spent the preceding 48 hours moving through several stages of a difficult reckoning and has arrived at the phone call with whatever posture their process has produced. He said, I need to talk to you about Tuesday. I said, Marcus, I have legal counsel involved and the matter has been referred to CPW and the DA's office. Any conversation we have about the substance of the case should happen through attorneys. He said, I'm not calling about the legal case. I'm calling because I want to say something before the lawyers take over. I waited. He said, I knew it was your property. I knew where the boundary was. I had seen the signs. A pause. I told myself the elk didn't know where the boundary was and that I was just following the elk and that there was no real harm. Another pause. That was a lie I told myself. I said nothing. He said, I'm sorry. Not to resolve the legal situation, I know that's its own process. I'm sorry because what I did was wrong and I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway. I said, I appreciate you saying that. He said, how's the bull? The question surprised me. It was unexpected enough that I answered it directly. Titan is fine, I said. He went back to his routine by mid-morning. Marcus said, good. A pause. He's impressive. Yes, I said, he is. There was a moment of silence that had a different quality than the silence before it. Then Marcus said, I'll have my attorney contact Leonard. That's appropriate, I said. He hung up. Renata was in the doorway. She had heard my side of the conversation. He apologized, she said. Yes. Genuine. I think so, I said. He had 48 hours to think about it, and he led with the admission rather than the justification. What does Leonard say about the legal situation? The criminal charge is CPW's and the DA's. We don't control that. The civil case is ours to resolve as we choose. I paused. Leonard thinks a negotiated civil settlement is likely to produce a better outcome than litigation, given that Marcus appears to be approaching this honestly. What does a settlement look like? Reimbursement for the damage to my fence, compensation for the documented prior incidents, a formal written acknowledgement of the trespass, and a permanent agreement that Marcus will not access our property for any purpose. Can you enforce that last part? In Colorado, a civil agreement not to trespass has teeth because violation creates immediate liability. Combined with the existing criminal record, assuming charges proceed, it creates a two-track consequence that makes future violation very expensive. She considered this, and Karen. I had been thinking about Karen. Karen had not called me. Karen had not appeared in any of the documentation. Karen was Marcus's wife, and Marcus had been hunting on my property, and Karen had no formal role in what had happened. But Karen and I were neighbors in Denver, and Karen had the specific talent for treating other people's resources as available that I had observed over 4 years of neighborhood proximity, and Marcus's certainty that our elk habitat was accessible had the quality of a belief that had been reinforced rather than challenged in his home environment. I said, Karen is a separate conversation. Are you going to have it? Eventually, I said, but the legal process comes first. The HOA meeting was requested by our Denver board president, a retired project manager named Harold Webb, after I informed him of the situation. Harold ran meetings with the organized efficiency of someone who had spent 30 years delivering complex projects on schedule and believed that information should move through appropriate channels promptly. He called the meeting for the following Wednesday. 29 of 44 households attended. Harold presented the situation factually, without editorializing. A member's spouse had been found hunting on another member's private ranch property and had been charged criminally and was subject to civil proceedings. He noted that the HOA had no authority over conduct at non-HOA properties, but that the membership deserved accurate information about a situation involving 2 community households. He asked if I wanted to speak. I said 3 things. First, the documentation I had maintained had been the basis for everything that followed: the CPW referral, the criminal charge, the civil claim. I said this not to be self-congratulatory, but because the documentation was replicable by any property owner who chose to maintain it. Second, the elk on our ranch had not been harmed. The habitat was intact. The 6x6 bull I had been documenting for 2 seasons had been photographed again the previous week at his usual location. Third, my fence had been repaired and the east boundary cameras had been upgraded. The ranch was secure. Karen was present at the meeting. She sat in the 3rd row and did not speak during the meeting and did not look at me when I spoke. She left promptly when Harold closed the session. She came to our Denver door Saturday morning, alone. She said she had spent the week understanding what had happened and understanding that she had not understood it before. She said she had known Marcus hunted on the property adjacent to ours. She had not known he had been entering our property. She said she had assumed he was on BLM land or their own parcel. I believed this part. She said she was sorry for what her husband had done and sorry that it had affected our relationship as neighbors. I said I accepted the apology on the terms she offered it, for the conduct she was aware of and for its effect on our relationship. The legal matters were separate. She said she understood. She left. Renata was at her desk when I came back in. How was it? She didn't know he was on our property, I said. She knew he was hunting near it. Near and on are different. Yes, I said, but the assumption that the elk didn't know the boundary, that's a shared assumption. She's been reinforcing it for 4 seasons without knowing the form Marcus would use it in. Renata was quiet for a moment. Is that forgivable? It's understandable, I said. Forgivable is a longer process. The criminal matter resolved 4 months later. Marcus entered a plea to hunting on private land without permission, a misdemeanor under Colorado statute, with an associated fine of $4,000, 30 days of deferred prosecution that would result in a dismissal if he had no further violations within 18 months, a suspension of his Colorado hunting license for 2 seasons, and a formal notation in CPW's records. The The civil matter settled 6 weeks before the criminal resolution. The settlement included reimbursement for fence repair, compensation for the documented prior incidents, calculated at a per-incident rate that Leonard had established based on comparable Colorado trespass cases, reimbursement of our legal fees through the settlement date, and a permanent civil no-trespass agreement with enforcement mechanisms that made future violation immediately actionable. Marcus's attorney, in the conversation I mentioned at the beginning of this account, had described it to a colleague as the most thoroughly prepared trespass case he had encountered in 21 years of practice. He was not wrong. I drove up to the ranch the weekend after the civil settlement. The east fence was fully repaired, new wire, tightened posts, signs reinstalled, and supplemented with 3 additional signs at the gap location. The cameras were upgraded. The monitoring system was continuous. I walked the east fence line on Saturday morning. All 684 acres had boundary markers at every corner and at regular intervals along every line. Every post was solid. Every sign was legible. Renata walked part of it with me, the east section, the aspen draw, the ground where the boot tracks had been, and where Titan had found Marcus Aldridge at 6:49 on a Tuesday morning. She stopped at the fence gap location, now repaired, looked at the wire, looked at the sign. "Clear," she said. "Clear," I agreed. We walked back through the draw. The aspen were in full fall color, that specific gold that does not exist anywhere else in the world at quite that intensity. The light came through them, the way light comes through aspen in October, broken and moving, and entirely itself. At 7:14, on the west ridge across the draw, the 6x6 stepped out of the timber. He stood for a moment at the timber edge, reading the air, then moved along the ridge in the unhurried way of an animal that knows its range and knows it is safe in it. Renata and I stood still and watched him. He did not look at us. He did not need to. We were on his land, in the sense that he had established his claim to it through years of use, and he moved through it with the authority of that claim. He disappeared back into the timber after perhaps 2 minutes. I looked at the fence line, at the signs, at the repaired gap that was no longer a gap. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. The ranch was documented and bounded and mine. And the elk moved through it undisturbed. Which was, from the beginning, the only thing I had wanted. Framed thumbnail text. He hunted my ranch 8 times. The 9th time, my bull found him first.